In an extraordinary interview tonight, Prince Harry has spoken candidly about the breakdown of his relationship with his father and other members of the royal family. He says his father doesn't speak to him, but added he would love a reconciliation.
It's not a surprise. For the time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK. I can't see a world in which I would be bringing my wife and children back to the UK at this point.
It was a quiet evening in California when Prince Harry sat down for the interview that would once again send tremors through the House of Windsor. No lavish setting, no ornate palace behind him. Just Harry, stripped of royal armor, speaking as a man, not a monarch's son. In an extraordinary interview tonight, the anchor began, her voice measured but laced with anticipation. And then came the moment. Prince Harry looked into the camera, exhaled, and began. His words were calm, but his eyes carried years of buried tension. "My father doesn't speak to me," he said. "No qualifiers, no diplomatic softeners, just the truth as he experienced it. He didn't say it with bitterness. There was no rage in his voice, just a quiet ache. The kind of ache that only comes when love has not yet died, but hope is slipping away." This wasn't a media stunt. This wasn't a calculated move for attention. This was a son asking the world to see the fracture between a father and his child, a fracture widened by tradition, duty, pride, and the weight of 1,000 years of monarchy. Still, despite everything, despite the headlines, the lawsuits, the explosive interviews, the Netflix documentaries, and the endless speculation, Harry's heart held on to one stubborn thread. "I would still love a reconciliation." He said it simply, without fanfare. And for a moment, it was easy to forget the titles and the controversy and see only a man who missed his family. But within the walls of Buckingham Palace, the mood was far colder. Unbeknownst to the public, Harry had sent a private, handwritten letter weeks earlier, an appeal to his father, King Charles III. In it, he requested to attend the upcoming King's Foundation event. It was to be a monumental evening of royal diplomacy, global charity, and high-profile appearances. For Harry, it was more than a public engagement. It was a potential first step home. He didn't ask for a speech slot or headlines. He asked only to be present, to show support, to stand beside the crown, not as a working royal, but as a son. The letter, according to insiders, was respectful, earnest, and surprisingly vulnerable. But the reply, if one could call it that, was clinical. Delivered not from Charles himself, but relayed through aides and courtiers, the response was as brief as it was devastating. "There is no room for traitors." No room for traitors. The words weren't official, but they were unmistakably royal. In one sentence, years of shared history, of childhood laughter at Balmoral, of grief walked side by side behind Diana's coffin, were reduced to a single label: traitor. It was a message designed not to wound, but to exclude, to erase. And it worked. Royal analysts quickly noted the absence of Harry's name from all official foundation materials. Behind palace doors, the decision had been made clear. His presence, the rejection was more than personal, it was institutional. And the timing couldn't have been more cutting. Just hours before the interview aired, the British courts had issued another blow to Harry. His legal challenge to reinstate UK security protections had been dismissed. Since stepping back from royal duties in 2020, Harry's government-funded security had been withdrawn. The appeal, argued on grounds of risk and dignity, had failed. In response, Harry didn't hold back. He called it an old-fashioned establishment stitch-up, a phrase that ignited media frenzy and stoked accusations from both sides. Critics accused him of playing victim. Supporters hailed him as exposing the deep rot of royal bureaucracy. But in that interview, there was no courtroom rage, only a man caught between duty and distance. As the cameras rolled, Harry didn't speak as a prince. He spoke as a son who had tried, a son who had written, appealed, waited, and been turned away. And as the broadcast drew to a close, a single truth hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. The last attempt had failed. The morning after the interview aired, the British tabloids erupted. Some called it a plea for peace. Others painted it as manipulation cloaked in sentimentality. But within palace walls, no headlines were needed to interpret the message. The king's silence spoke louder than anything the press could print. The King's Foundation event, the very one Harry had requested to attend, was just days away. Preparations were in full swing. Heads of state, philanthropists, and celebrities were confirmed to appear. It was set to be a night of prestige and purpose, the kind of royal event that polished the monarchy's image before the world. And yet, behind the glamour and protocol, there was a shadow. A name that had been intentionally removed from the guest list. A face once at the center of royal photographs, now scrubbed clean from palace schedules. Prince Harry. He had sent his letter weeks earlier, quietly, without media attention. According to sources close to the palace, it was heartfelt. He acknowledged the strain he'd caused. He did not ask for forgiveness, only a seat in the room. To stand in solidarity, not for headlines, but for legacy. What he received instead was a private but cutting response, delivered through intermediaries not even dignified with a personal note from the king himself. There is no room for traitors. The phrase wasn't officially written, but it had been spoken, firmly, by someone close enough to carry the royal sentiment with authority, and it spread like frost across the palace corridors. There would be no seat for Harry, no handshake, no photo op, no polite nods from afar. The rejection wasn't merely administrative, it was a strategic exile disguised as discretion, a message for Harry and for the world. This institution no longer considers him one of its own. To the public, the event proceeded with seamless grace. The king arrived smiling, accompanied by Queen Camilla, their entrance marked by a fanfare of trumpets. The cameras panned across the ballroom, rows of dignitaries, gowns and tuxedos, champagne glasses raised in toasts. But those who knew the subtext saw something else. They saw an empty chair that never made it to the ballroom. They saw a son erased. Inside the palace, aides defended the decision. He made his choice, one senior official reportedly said. You don't get to insult the crown in public and then ask for a warm welcome behind closed doors. Others were more blunt. He's dangerous now, one advisor whispered to a reporter. Not with guns, with cameras, with microphones, with memoirs. It wasn't the first time Harry had been seen as a risk, but this was different. This was the line being drawn in stone. Those close to Harry, meanwhile, were stunned by the cruelty of it all. Not just the rejection, but the manner of it. No direct call, no letter, no gesture of decency from a father to his son, just silence followed by exclusion. In California, Harry received the news the same way the public would. Through silence first and then confirmation from aides. He had been denied. Not as a matter of protocol, but of punishment. It was, by every definition, a calculated move, not just personal, political, not just rejection, retaliation. And it landed like a blow to the chest. Sources close to Meghan say she was furious, not only for Harry's sake, but for the message it sent their children. What does this say to Archie and Lilibet? One friend asked. That their father is a traitor? That they're unwanted by blood? Inside royal circles, the narrative was clear. Harry had turned his back on the institution. Now the institution was turning its back on him. But this wasn't a tabloid feud. This was a fracture at the heart of a monarchy that had long survived by keeping its wounds hidden. Now, the rift was on display, and everyone was watching. In a single week, Harry had reached out, been rejected, and told wordlessly, ruthlessly, that his place was no longer beside the throne, but across an ocean. Removed, rejected, unforgiven. And as the foundation event unfolded under glittering chandeliers and noble speeches, one name lingered like an echo just outside the gates. Harry. The prince who once walked beside the king. Now, not even permitted in the room. As the golden doors of the King's Foundation Gala closed to him, another set, those of the British legal system, swung open only to slam just as hard. Prince Harry had known the fight for protection wouldn't be easy. Since stepping back from royal duties in early 2020, his status in the eyes of the state had shifted dramatically. No longer a working royal, his right to government-funded security had been revoked. It was a blow not just to his ego but to his personal safety, and, as he argued, the dignity of the institution he still represented by name. The issue was personal, and political, and dangerous. To Harry, it wasn't about privilege, it was about risk. As a former royal, a military veteran, and a global figure, he argued that the threats to his life and his family were ongoing. Walking the streets of London without protection wasn't just unfair, it was reckless, so he sued. He brought his case before the High Court, arguing that the decision to strip his security had been flawed, lacking proper process, and disregarding his unique exposure as a former royal. The Crown, of course, pushed back, firmly. The Home Office defended its stance with cold legal precision, insisting that Harry's voluntary exit from royal life came with consequences. He could not pick and choose when to be treated as royalty, and the court agreed. The ruling came down the morning after the King's Foundation event. A coincidence in timing, but not in consequence. The judge's opinion was methodical, respectful, but final. Harry had not been treated unlawfully. The downgrade of his security, first quietly executed in 2020, then publicly contested, would stand. Harry, dignified in public, was furious in private. He released a short statement, calm, measured, but sharp. This ruling is not justice. It is an old-fashioned establishment stitch-up. Those words hit the headlines like a match tossed on dry grass. Establishment stitch-up, the phrase carried weight. It wasn't just a critique of a decision. It was an indictment of the entire system. Royal commentators were quick to pounce. Harry has declared war on the institution, one former palace advisor said. First the family, now the courts. What does he expect to gain from this? Others, more sympathetic, saw it differently. This isn't about ego, a security expert noted. Harry's right. He is a target. The threat level doesn't disappear just because the monarchy draws a line in the sand. But the damage had already been done. To the institution, Harry's lawsuit had confirmed their fears, that he would keep challenging the system from the outside, court by court, headline by headline. To the public, it painted a painful contrast. While King Charles was toasting foreign dignitaries and smiling for the cameras, his son was being told he could not even pay for police protection in his homeland. In California, Harry sat with his legal team, reviewing the decision. The walls of his Montecito home, once a refuge, felt increasingly like a fortress. Not because of grandeur, but because the world outside was growing colder. He wasn't a prince with access anymore. He was a litigant. He wasn't family. He was a former. And while the king remained silent, letting the court speak for him, the message was unmistakable. There would be no exceptions, no special treatment, not even for blood. Harry had made his choice, they whispered behind palace gates, and now the kingdom was making theirs. It was a loss not just of security, but of standing. Not just legal, but symbolic. The boy who had once stood beside his brother on palace balconies now stood alone in courtrooms, arguing for his right to be seen, to be safe, to matter. And as the ruling was published online and dissected in media outlets around the globe, one photograph circulated widely. Harry, stepping out of a London courthouse weeks prior, head held high, jaw clenched, but eyes that betrayed the ache beneath the resolve. This wasn't the battlefield he was trained for. By the time spring arrived in London, the royal gardens bloomed with careful perfection. Roses trimmed, fountains polished, photographers positioned just so. To the world, the monarchy appeared untouched, timeless, unshaken. But behind the ivy-covered walls of Buckingham Palace, something had shifted, something permanent. Prince Harry was no longer just a distant figure. He was gone. Not in body alone, but in status, in presence, in belonging. He hadn't abdicated a throne, he wasn't stripped of a title. But something more cutting had occurred. He had been erased. Official schedules no longer included him. Public statements avoided even a mention. In private conversations between senior aides, his name was treated like a ghost, only acknowledged when absolutely necessary, and only in terms of containment. He was now unmistakably on the outside. The decision to reject Harry's presence at the King's Foundation event hadn't been a last-minute snub. It was part of a new, quiet protocol. One designed not to humiliate, but to isolate. Not to create scandal, but to slowly remove him from every part of the machine. Exile, not in law, but in practice. It wasn't the kind of exile his ancestors might have known. No banishment, no prison, no decree. It was colder than that. Polished, clinical, thorough. He would no longer be consulted, no longer invited, no longer needed. And that was the most devastating part. Not the punishment, but the irrelevance. In Montecito, Harry wrestled with the finality of it all. The lawsuit was over. The letters had been ignored. The olive branches burned before they could take root. He had said his piece, in interviews, in books, in courtrooms. And the response from the family, from the crown, from the country he once called home? Silence. Meghan urged him to move forward, to protect their peace, to build a life untethered to those who didn't want him. But Harry, despite everything, still looked back. He missed his brother. He missed the smell of Windsor's earth after a morning rain. He missed the rhythm of duty, the crisp uniforms, the deep bows, the strange comfort of being part of something bigger than himself. He missed his father, not the monarch, the man who once held his hand at boarding school gates, the man who had walked behind Diana's coffin with him, the man who now would not answer his calls. Insiders confirmed that reconciliation was no longer on the table. Charles, once hopeful of mending fences, had accepted a new truth. Some wounds don't close, not when reopened in public, not when magnified by memoirs and prime-time interviews. For the Crown, this was triage, a strategy, a defense mechanism. Keep the working parts intact. Remove the risk. Preserve the legacy. And for Harry, it was exile. He had become something between a warning and a caution, but the cost this time was visible. It was in the empty balcony space where he once stood. In the coldness of royal statements. In the deliberate way the Duke of Sussex was now used without warmth. And yet, as cameras captured Charles greeting foreign dignitaries, or William and Kate smiling at charity galas, somewhere across the Atlantic, Harry played with Archie in the backyard. He held Lilibet in his arms. He grilled dinner with Meghan. He laughed. Because exile, for all its grief, also meant freedom. No titles, no restrictions, no scripts. Only the haunting knowledge that home was now a place that no longer had a door for him. And as the world debated, as commentators speculated, one truth remained unspoken but understood. Harry didn't leave the monarchy left him.